A poor girl enters a billionaire's car by accident, and the next day she's pregnant with his child. What starts as a simple mistake turns into the most shocking story of her life. One moment, she's just a maid trying to survive. The next, the world is calling her the billionaire's lover, and her miracle baby becomes front-page news. He swears it's impossible. She swears she's telling the truth. But when lies spread faster than mercy, and the cameras won't stop flashing, both their lives spiral out of control. Now the world wants to know, is she a scammer, or is this truly a miracle no one can explain? And when faith, fame, and love collide, can one broken man and one desperate woman find redemption in the middle of a scandal that could destroy them both? What if the biggest mistake of her life was actually a blessing sent by heaven? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The rain fell in heavy sheets across downtown Chicago, drumming against the glass and steel towers that pierced the darkening sky. Gianna Jennings pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she hurried out of the gleaming lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Her feet ached from 12 straight hours of cleaning luxury suites, and her mind was foggy with exhaustion. Lightning flashed overhead, making her jump. The rain had soaked through her clothes within seconds of stepping outside. She squinted through the downpour, searching desperately for the rideshare she'd called. A line of black cars idled along the curb, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. That must be it, she mumbled, spotting a sleek sedan that matched the description on her phone. Her fingers were trembling. From cold or fatigue, she wasn't sure anymore. She grabbed the handle of the back door and slipped inside, bringing a splash of rainwater with her. 2317 North Milwaukee Avenue, please, she said quietly, fumbling to find her seatbelt in the dim interior. The leather seats felt impossibly soft beneath her wet clothes. The sound of the doors locking made her freeze. Something wasn't right. The car smelled too nice, like expensive leather and subtle cologne, not the artificial pine freshener she was used to in ride shares. Slowly she raised her eyes to the rearview mirror. A pair of striking grey eyes met hers. They belonged to a face she'd seen countless times on the news and society pages. Gabriel Harlow, the reclusive billionaire whose wife's tragic death 2 years ago had shocked the city. Her heart lurched into her throat. I'm so sorry, she stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. I thought this was my Uber. She reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Gabriel Harlow turned in his seat, and Gianna was struck by how different he looked in person compared to his photos in the papers. His face was leaner, more weathered, with subtle lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was something else, a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. Wait, he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. You're soaked through. Where do you need to go? Gianna hesitated, water dripping from her hair onto her lap. Really, I can wait for another car. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. He studied her for a moment, and she noticed the shadow of grief that seemed to follow his every expression. I insist, it's not safe to be out in this weather. The rain hammered against the roof of the car, filling the silence between them. Gianna's practical nature warred with her embarrassment. Finally, practicality won out. 2317 North Milwaukee Avenue, she repeated quietly. If you're sure it's no trouble. Gabriel nodded and spoke quietly to the driver. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, its wipers fighting against the deluge. Gianna sat perfectly still, trying to make herself as small as possible in the spacious back seat. She was acutely aware of the contrast between her worn uniform and the car's luxurious interior. The city lights blurred past the windows, creating streaks of color through the rain-streaked glass. In the front seat, Gabriel seemed lost in thought, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Gianna found herself studying him, noting the way his shoulders carried an invisible weight. She recognized that burden. It was the same one she saw in the mirror some days, though their sorrows came from very different places. They drove in silence, but it wasn't as uncomfortable as she'd expected. There was something almost peaceful about it, like they were in a bubble separated from the chaos of the storm outside. The car's quiet engine and the steady rhythm of the rain created a cocoon of calm. As they turned onto Milwaukee Avenue, Gianna gathered her courage. "Thank you, Mr. Harlow. This was very kind of you." He turned slightly, catching her eye in the mirror again. "It's nothing," he said, but there was a warmth in his voice that suggested otherwise. The car slowed to a stop in front of her building, a modest brick structure that looked even shabbier next to the elegant vehicle. Gianna reached for her small purse, making sure she had her keys. In her haste to exit, she didn't notice her compact umbrella slipping from her bag onto the floor of the car. She pushed open the door, letting in a gust of rain-cooled air. "Be safe," Gabriel said softly, almost too quietly to hear over the storm. Gianna nodded, managing a small smile. "You too." She stepped out into the rain and hurried toward her building's entrance, her wet shoes squeaking on the concrete. Just before she reached the door, she glanced back. The black car was still there, waiting to make sure she got inside safely. As she fumbled with her keys, she felt an odd flutter in her chest. Not quite happiness, but something like hope. It had been a strange encounter, but there had been something real in that shared silence, in the quiet recognition of another soul carrying their own burden. The car pulled away only after she'd stepped inside, its taillights glowing red through the rain before disappearing around the corner. Gianna climbed the stairs to her tiny apartment, leaving a trail of water droplets behind her. It wasn't until she went to hang up her wet jacket that she realized her umbrella was missing. In the warmth of her small home, surrounded by the few treasured possessions she'd managed to collect over the years, Gianna thought about the unexpected kindness she'd experienced. She thought about the gentle eyes of a man whose grief was public knowledge, but whose kindness had been a private revelation. As she changed into dry clothes and made herself a cup of tea, she wondered if he'd noticed the umbrella, and what he might think of its humble blue nylon and slightly bent ribs. What she couldn't know was how that forgotten umbrella would become a thread connecting their lives, weaving together two souls who had each, in their own way, been searching for shelter from life's storms. The morning sun crept through Gianna's thin curtains, casting pale yellow stripes across her worn carpet. She blinked awake, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back from her thin mattress. The digital clock on her bedside table read 5:45 in the morning. Another day was beginning, and there was work to be done. Her tiny apartment was really just one room with a bathroom, but Gianna had made it as homey as she could. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, with a mini fridge and a 2-burner stove. Her bed doubled as a couch during the day, and a folding table served as both dining space and desk. Though modest, every surface gleamed with care, evidence of her dedication to making the best of what she had. She went through her morning routine methodically, washing her face with cold water to chase away the last wisps of sleep. As she dressed in her grey uniform, her mind wandered to the previous night's unexpected encounter. The memory of sitting in Gabriel Harlow's car felt almost dreamlike now. Though her missing umbrella proved it had been real, the bus ride to the Caldwell estate took 45 minutes, during which Gianna said her morning prayers and mentally prepared for the day ahead. The estate sat in an exclusive neighborhood where even the trees seemed to grow more elegantly than elsewhere. Iron gates parted to admit the staff entrance, and Gianna made her way to the service door, nodding to the groundskeeper, who was already trimming the immaculate hedges. Inside, the kitchen bustled with morning activity. Other maids and kitchen staff moved efficiently, preparing breakfast for the Caldwells. Gianna tied on her apron and began arranging the delicate china onto silver serving trays. The morning light streaming through. The tall windows made the polished surfaces gleam like mirrors. Mrs. Caldwell's voice drifted in from the breakfast room, where she was entertaining 2 friends from her charity committee. "Did you attend Gabriel Harlowe's gala last weekend?" she asked, her tone carrying that particular blend of sympathy and satisfaction that marked society gossip. "Oh yes," one of her friends replied. "Such an elegant affair, but so sad, really. You can see he's still not over his loss. All that money, and he looks more miserable every year." "Well," Mrs. Caldwell said, "I suppose even billionaires can't buy happiness." Gianna's hand stilled on the china cup she was placing. She thought about the gentle way Gabriel had spoken to her in the car, how he'd waited to make sure she got inside safely. There had been sadness in him, yes, but also kindness. She allowed herself a small, secret smile as she continued her work. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of cleaning, serving, and tidying. By early afternoon, Gianna was in the formal dining room, polishing the silver service. The large windows let in streams of warm sunlight, and the heavy curtains had been drawn back to air the room. She worked methodically, her cleaning cloth moving in small circles across the ornate surface of a serving tray. The first wave of dizziness caught her by surprise. She gripped the edge of the sideboard, waiting for it to pass. But instead of clearing, her vision began to blur around the edges. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and the silver tray slipped from her fingers, landing on the thick carpet with a muffled thud. "Gianna?" Maria, one of the other maids, rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" "I just need to sit for a moment," Gianna tried to say, but the words came out slurred. The last thing she remembered was Maria's alarmed face as the room went dark. She came to in the back of Maria's car, her colleague's worried voice telling her they were going to the clinic. Mrs. Caldwell said to take the rest of the day off and get checked out. Maria explained, her eyes meeting Gianna's in the rearview mirror. "You scared us all half to death." The clinic was busy but efficient. They took her blood pressure, drew blood, and asked her questions about her medical history. Gianna sat on the examination table, feeling embarrassed about causing such a fuss. The paper crinkled beneath her as she waited for the doctor to return with her test results. When he did, his expression was puzzled. He checked his tablet again, then looked at her with a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Miss Jennings," he said slowly, "according to these results, you're pregnant." Gianna stared at him, certain she had misheard. "That's not possible," she said automatically. "There must be some mistake." The doctor pulled up her medical records on his tablet. "I see here that you were declared infertile after an accident 7 years ago," he acknowledged. "But these test results are quite clear. You're approximately 6 weeks along." "But how?" Gianna's voice was barely a whisper. The doctor smiled gently. "Sometimes, Ms. Jennings, nature surprises us. In medical terms, we'd call this a spontaneous recovery of fertility, but given the circumstances—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, some might call it a miracle." Gianna's hands trembled as she collected the prenatal vitamins and information packets the doctor gave her. She walked out of the clinic in a daze, barely registering the bustling city around her. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, but she hardly noticed its beauty. Her feet carried her automatically toward home as her mind tried to process the impossible news. A baby. After all these years of accepting that she would never have children of her own, after learning to find peace with that loss, Now this miracle had dropped into her life, like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew. As she walked, she found herself whispering prayers, not the formal ones she knew by heart, but stumbling, wondering words of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she murmured, one hand pressing gently against her still flat stomach. "Thank you for this impossible gift." The city moved around her, cars honking, people rushing home from work, vendors closing their stalls for the day. But Gianna felt separate from it all, as if she were walking in a dream. Every step seemed to echo with the doctor's words. Some might call it a miracle. In her heart, she knew that's exactly what it was. A miracle she didn't yet understand, but one she would cherish with every fiber of her being. Gianna's hands shook slightly as she stirred the pot of vegetable soup simmering on her small stove. The familiar motions of cooking helped steady her nerves, but her mind kept circling back to the doctor's impossible news. The aroma of herbs and vegetables filled her tiny kitchen as she prepared the evening meal she always shared with Miss Ruth, her elderly neighbor. The building they lived in was old and modest, with creaky stairs and worn carpets, but it had become home. Gianna carefully ladled the steaming soup into 2 bowls, added some crusty bread she'd picked up at the corner store, and carried the simple meal across the hall to Miss Ruth's apartment. "Come in, child." Miss Ruth called at her knock. The older woman sat in her favorite armchair, a well-worn Bible open on her lap. Her silver hair caught the evening light streaming through the window, creating a sort of halo effect that made her look almost angelic. "I brought soup," Gianna said, setting down the tray on the small table beside Miss Ruth's chair. Her hands were trembling again, and some of the soup sloshed over the rim of one bowl. Miss Ruth's keen eyes didn't miss a thing. "Something's troubling you," she said, not a question but a gentle observation. "Sit down and tell me what's got you all aflutter." Gianna sank into the chair, opposite her neighbor, twisting her hands in her lap. I found out something today. Something impossible." The words caught in her throat. "Impossible?" Miss Ruth's eyes twinkled. "Child, when life hands you the impossible, it's just God showing off." A faint smile tugged at Gianna's lips despite her anxiety. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, the words still strange on her tongue. "But I was told years ago I could never have children. The doctors were certain." "Ah." Miss Ruth reached across and took one of Gianna's trembling hands in her own weathered one. "And now you're scared? How will I explain it?" Gianna's voice cracked. "What will people think? I barely make enough to support myself. And the Caldwells." She trailed off, thinking of her employer's likely reaction to a pregnant maid. "People will think what they want to think," Miss Ruth said firmly. "But you and I know the truth. This is a blessing. A miracle." She squeezed Gianna's hand. "God doesn't give us more than we can handle, even if we can't see how we'll handle it at first." They ate their soup together as the sun set outside, Miss Ruth sharing stories of her own struggles as a young mother, her words weaving a comfort blanket around Gianna's worried heart. Yet even as she felt herself calming, practical concerns kept bubbling up. How would she afford prenatal care? What about when the baby came? Across town, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline, Gabriel Harlow sat alone in the growing darkness. The only light came from his desk lamp and the city below, casting long shadows across the room. In his hands, he held a stack of photographs he hadn't looked at in months. His wife Sarah's smile beamed up at him from the top picture, her last professional photo shoot taken just weeks before the accident. She was radiant, one hand resting on her swollen belly, eyes bright with dreams of the future. a future that had ended on a rainy night 5 years ago, taking both her and their unborn daughter with it. Gabriel's throat tightened as he flipped through the photos. Sarah at their wedding, Sarah on vacation in Italy, Sarah painting the nursery, her face spotted with pale yellow paint. Each image was a knife to his heart, yet he couldn't stop looking. A small movement caught his eye, something rolling across his desk in the air-conditioning breeze. Gianna's umbrella. He'd meant to have it returned to her, but something had made him keep it in his office instead. Now he picked it up, running his thumb over the faded initials engraved on the handle. GJ. The memory of her face in his car that rainy night came back to him. The startled look in her eyes, the quiet dignity in her bearing, despite her obvious embarrassment. She hadn't simpered or flirted or tried to impress him. She'd simply spoken to him like a person, not a headline or a bank account. Setting down the photos, Gabriel turned the umbrella over in his hands. He could have sent it back through his assistant or had it delivered, but suddenly he needed to return it himself. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him with such simple human kindness. Maybe it was how her presence had briefly made him feel less alone. "I'll take it to her tomorrow," he said aloud to the empty office. The words surprised him. He hadn't made a spontaneous decision like this in years. That night, sleep eluded both of them. Gianna lay in her narrow bed, one hand resting on her stomach, listening to the city sounds filtering through her thin walls. A miracle, Miss Ruth had called it. But miracles came with responsibilities. What kind of life could she offer a child? Her tiny apartment barely had room for a crib. Her savings wouldn't cover even the basics a baby needed. She thought of her own childhood in foster care, bouncing from home to home. "I'll give you better," she whispered fiercely to her unborn child. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you'll always know you're loved." Across the city, Gabriel stood at his penthouse windows, looking out at the sleeping city. Sarah's photos lay on his desk behind him, a reminder of all he'd lost. Yet for the first time in 5 years, he found himself thinking about the future instead of the past. "Do you still write new beginnings?" he murmured, the prayer feeling rusty on his lips. He hadn't spoken to God since the funeral, angry at the silence that had met his desperate prayers that night. But something about Gianna's quiet grace had stirred something in him, a longing for connection he'd thought long dead. The city lights blurred before his eyes as memories of Sarah mixed with thoughts of tomorrow, of returning an umbrella, of maybe, just maybe, having a conversation that didn't revolve around business or charity galas or his carefully maintained image. The night stretched on, holding 2 souls awake with their thoughts, a maid wondering how to give a miracle baby a future, and a broken man wondering if he dared hope for one himself. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear over the Caldwell estate, its manicured lawns glistening with dew. Inside, Gianna moved through her morning routine with practiced grace, though her mind wandered to the miracle growing inside her. She'd managed to hide her morning sickness so far, ducking into bathrooms between tasks, but she knew she couldn't keep the secret forever. The grand foyer echoed with her footsteps as she polished the already gleaming banister. Classical music drifted from Mrs. Caldwell's sitting room, where the lady of the house was preparing for another of her charity committee meetings. "Gianna," Mrs. Caldwell's sharp voice cut through the Mozart. "We're expecting an important guest. Make sure the good china is ready in the front parlor." "Yes, ma'am," Gianna replied, hurrying to the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged delicate teacups on the silver serving tray. The morning sickness was worse today, making every movement a careful dance between efficiency and keeping her balance. The doorbell's deep chime resonated through the mansion at precisely 10 o'clock. Gianna smoothed her simple black uniform and opened the heavy oak door, her professional smile already in place. It fell away instantly. There stood Gabriel Harlow, more imposing in daylight than she remembered. His tailored charcoal suit couldn't hide the athletic build beneath, and his azure eyes held the same gentle sadness she remembered from that rainy night. In his hands was her small umbrella. The serving tray wobbled dangerously as she stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Harlow," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Miss Jennings." He held out the umbrella. "I believe this belongs to you." Before Gianna could reach for it, a high-pitched squeal of delight echoed through the foyer. 6-year-old Tommy Caldwell came barreling down the hallway, his small feet pattering on the marble floor. His face lit up at the sight of Gabriel. "The man from TV!" Tommy bounced excitedly, then turned to Gianna with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. "Gianna, look, it's him." Then, with the devastating innocence only a child could muster, he giggled and announced to the gathered household staff, "Mommy says he's my daddy." The world seemed to stop spinning. Gianna's hands went numb. The serving tray slipped from her grasp, teacups shattering against the marble floor in a cacophony of broken porcelain and stunned silence. She barely noticed the hot tea soaking into her shoes. The foyer had filled with people. Household staff, Mrs. Caldwell's charity committee members, all frozen in tableau of shocked expressions and quickly raising phones. Gabriel stood motionless, his face a mask of confusion and growing concern. "Tommy!" Mrs. Caldwell appeared, her face flushed with mortification. "What on earth? But you said—" Tommy protested, pointing at Gabriel. "I heard you tell Daddy that he looks just like—" "Thomas Andrew Caldwell, go to your room this instant!" Mrs. Caldwell's voice cracked like a whip. Gianna's vision swam. "Mrs. Caldwell, I can explain." But what could she explain? The room was spinning, whispers already flying between the society ladies who'd witnessed the scene. "You're fired." Mrs. Caldwell's words cut through the chaos like ice. "Pack your things and leave. Now." "But I didn't—" Gianna started, tears threatening to spill. "Get out!" Each word dripped with venom. "How dare you bring such scandal into my home?" Through her blur of tears, Gianna saw phones emerging from purses, heard the rapid-fire clicks of messages being sent. One of the kitchen staff was already on the phone, voice hushed but excited. "You won't believe what just happened at the Caldwells." Gabriel stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Caldwell, surely there's been a misunderstanding." But Mrs. Caldwell had already turned away, shepherding her scandalized guests toward the parlor, leaving Gianna standing amid the broken china and spilled tea. The umbrella lay forgotten on the floor where Gabriel had dropped it in the chaos. Gianna fled upstairs to the tiny room where she kept her few belongings. Her hands shook as she stuffed clothes into her worn backpack, tears falling freely now. Through the window, she could already see reporters gathering at the gates, drawn by the viral tweets and texts that had exploded from the mansion. When she came back downstairs, Gabriel was gone. The foyer was empty except for a maid sweeping up the broken teacups, pointedly avoiding Gianna's eyes. The umbrella had vanished too, as if that whole surreal moment had been a dream. Outside, the autumn air had turned cold and threatening. Dark clouds gathered overhead as Gianna walked away from the Caldwell estate for the last time. She had no car and no money for a cab. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications as the story spread across social media, but she couldn't bear to look. The first drops of rain began to fall as she reached the bus stop 6 blocks away. Her legs felt like lead, her stomach churning with morning sickness and stress. The world tilted sideways, going grey at the edges. "Please," she whispered, one hand pressed to her abdomen, the other reaching for something, anything to hold on to. Please, my baby. But there was nothing to grab, no one to hear her plea. Gianna felt her knees buckle, the cold sidewalk rising up to meet her as consciousness slipped away. The last thing she felt was the rain on her face, mixing with her tears as the world went black. The rain fell in sheets across Chicago's streets, drumming against the roof of Gabriel Harlow's car as his driver, James, navigated through the afternoon traffic. Gabriel stared out the window, his mind replaying the chaos at the Caldwell estate. Something about the whole scene felt wrong. The cruel dismissal, the rush to judgment, the fear in Gianna's eyes. "Sir." James's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp with concern. "There's someone collapsed on the sidewalk ahead." Gabriel leaned forward, peering through the rain-streaked windshield. His heart stopped. A familiar figure lay crumpled on the wet concrete, her dark hair spread across the sidewalk like spilled ink. Gianna. He was out of the car before James could fully stop, the rain immediately soaking through his expensive suit. He ran to her side, dropping to his knees beside her still form. Her skin felt cold and clammy to his touch. "Miss Jennings?" He gently turned her face toward him, checking for injuries. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Without hesitation, Gabriel slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her shoulders, lifting her against his chest. She felt impossibly light, like a bird with broken wings. "James, the hospital, now!" The driver already had the back door open. Gabriel carefully maneuvered inside, cradling Gianna across his lap. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her shallow breathing. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice rough with worry. "Please, stay with me." The drive to Chicago Memorial seemed endless. Gabriel kept his fingers pressed to Gianna's wrist, counting each pulse beat like a prayer. When they finally arrived, he carried her through the emergency room doors, calling for help. Everything moved in a blur after that. Nurses rushing forward with a gurney, questions fired rapid fire about what happened, forms thrust into his hands to fill out. He paced the waiting room for what felt like hours, his wet clothes slowly drying in the sterile hospital air. Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Harlow, Miss Jennings is awake. She's stable but extremely dehydrated and showing signs of severe stress. She's also..." The doctor paused, checking his chart. "She's in the early stages of pregnancy." Gabriel felt the world tilt slightly. "Pregnant?" "Yes. Both mother and baby are okay for now, but she needs rest and careful monitoring. She's asking to see you." Following the doctor down the quiet hallway, Gabriel tried to process this new information. He found Gianna propped up in a hospital bed, looking small and pale against the white sheets. An IV drip fed clear fluid into her arm. The moment she saw him, tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't say that child was yours," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never would. Please believe me, I would never lie about something like that." Gabriel moved to her bedside, his heart aching at the fear in her voice. "I believe you," he said softly. "I know you wouldn't." "I don't know what to do," she admitted, wiping at her tears. "The media is everywhere. My job is gone. My reputation." She trailed off, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. Gabriel studied her for a long moment. "I have a solution, if you'll trust me. My estate in Lake Forest, it's private, secure, away from the city. You could stay there, just until things calm down." Gianna's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly, please." He interrupted gently. "Let me help. You need somewhere safe right now, somewhere quiet where you can rest." He managed a small smile. "I have more rooms than I know what to do with anyway." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just until things calm down?" just until things calm down. He promised. The doctor insisted on keeping Gianna for a few more hours of observation. Gabriel made calls, arranging for clothes and necessities to be delivered to the estate. By evening, when she was cleared for release, a fresh outfit waited for her, and James stood ready with the car. The drive north to Lake Forest took them out of the city's chaos into the peaceful countryside. Gianna watched out the window as mansions gave way to rolling estates hidden behind iron gates and old trees. When they turned into a long driveway, she gasped softly. Gabriel's estate sprawled across manicured grounds, its limestone facade glowing warmly in the sunset. A housekeeper met them at the door, Mrs. Chen, a motherly woman who immediately took Gianna under her wing. "Let's get you settled, dear," she said kindly, leading Gianna towards the grand staircase. "I've prepared the blue guest suite. It has a lovely view of the gardens." Gabriel watched them go, noticing how Gianna's shoulders had finally begun to relax. He retreated to his study, trying to make sense of the day's events. Hours later, as he passed the blue suite on his way to bed, he paused. Through the slightly open door, he could see Gianna kneeling beside the bed in a borrowed nightgown. Her hands were clasped, head bowed in prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for mercy I don't deserve," she whispered, her voice carrying faintly into the hallway. "Watch over this child, guide my steps, and please—" She hesitated. "Please help Mr. Harlow find peace." Something stirred in Gabriel's chest, an unfamiliar warmth he hadn't felt in years. He moved quietly past her door, not wanting to interrupt her private moment. In his own room, he stood at the window, looking out at the moon-silvered gardens. Hope, he realized. That feeling in his chest was hope. Morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the estate's many windows. Gabriel found Gianna already in the breakfast room, wrapped in a borrowed robe, stirring honey into tea. She looked up when he entered, offering a tentative smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning." He took his usual seat, accepting coffee from Mrs. Chen. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." She paused, then added, "For everything." Their eyes met across the table, two wounded souls finding unexpected shelter under the same roof. Neither spoke of what would come next or how long this fragile peace might last. For now, it was enough to share the quiet morning, letting the sun warm away the shadows of yesterday's storm. Mrs. Chen bustled between them, filling plates with eggs and toast, her presence a comforting buffer in the delicate atmosphere. Outside, birds sang in the garden, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the morning hour. It was a moment of perfect, temporary grace, a pause between what was and what would be. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at Gabriel's Lake Forest estate. Each morning, Gianna would wake before dawn, padding softly down to the kitchen in her borrowed slippers. Mrs. Chen had shown her where everything was kept, and soon the morning routine became as natural as breathing. The first rays of sunlight would find her whisking eggs or folding blueberries into pancake batter, humming old hymns under her breath. The simple act of creating nourishment for others gave her peace, even as her own future remained uncertain. On the third morning, Gabriel appeared in the doorway earlier than usual, drawn by the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon. He paused, watching as Gianna moved about his kitchen with quiet grace. "You don't have to cook," he said softly, making her start. Mrs. Chen could— "I want to," Gianna interrupted gently, setting a plate of golden French toast before him. "It helps me feel useful." After that, it became their routine. Gabriel would arrive just as the coffee finished brewing, and they would share breakfast in companionable silence. Sometimes he brought his laptop, working while she read from a small Bible she'd found in the library. Other times, they simply sat, watching morning mist rise from the gardens through the bay windows. Between breakfast and lunch, Gianna would tend to his late wife's roses. She'd discovered the garden on her second day, a beautiful collection of heritage blooms in shades of cream and pale pink. The brass nameplate read, "Catherine's Roses," in elegant script. At first, she'd been hesitant to touch them, feeling like an intruder in this sacred space. But when she noticed some of the plants struggling, maternal instinct took over. She couldn't bear to see anything in her care wither. Gabriel found her there one morning, carefully pruning dead leaves and talking softly to the plants. He stood watching from the stone pathway, something tight loosening in his chest at the sight of life returning to Catherine's beloved garden. "She would have liked you," he said quietly, making Gianna turn. "Catherine, I mean. She believed in nurturing beautiful things." Gianna brushed soil from her hands, studying his face. "Tell me about her." "Not today," he'd replied, but his voice was gentle rather than cold. As the days passed, Gianna's presence began to soften the sharp edges of the house. Her humming echoed through halls that had been silent for years, the kitchen filled with the scent of fresh-baked bread and soup simmering on the stove. Even Mrs. Chen seemed lighter, sharing recipes and stories with Gianna as they worked side by side. One morning, as they sat at breakfast, Gianna noticed Gabriel watching her pray over her meal. "Does it make you uncomfortable?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, I used to have that kind of faith once. Before you lost everything." She finished when he trailed off. Setting down her fork, she met his gaze steadily. "When you've lost everything, kindness is the only wealth you have left." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Gabriel sat back, something shifting in his expression as he considered her statement. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, Gabriel found Gianna in Catherine's garden again. Without speaking, he gestured for her to walk with him. They wandered the winding paths of the estate grounds, past geometric hedges and bubbling fountains. The air was sweet with late summer flowers, and crickets were beginning their evening chorus. "Catherine and I met in college," Gabriel said suddenly, his voice low. "She was studying art history. I was already focused on business, but she made me see beauty in things I'd dismissed as impractical." Gianna listened quietly as they walked, letting him find his own pace with the story. "We were married here, in the garden. She redesigned everything, turned formal rows into flowing English borders. Said a garden should feel like a story unfolding." He paused by a stone bench. "When she got pregnant, she started planning the nursery. She painted clouds on the ceiling herself, even though I offered to hire someone." His voice caught slightly. Gianna waited, her heart aching for his pain. "It was raining that night. She'd gone to pick up more paint. The other driver was drunk, ran a red light." He trailed off, looking out over the darkening gardens. "I lost them both in an instant." "I'm so sorry," Gianna said softly, not reaching for him, but letting her presence offer what comfort it could. "For a long time, I was angry at God," he continued. "Couldn't understand how he could take everything that mattered. I buried myself in work, in charity projects Catherine would have loved, but I couldn't feel anything anymore." They stood in silence as the last light faded from the sky. Fireflies began to dance among the roses like stars fallen to earth. "Catherine used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go," Gabriel said finally. "I think I've been carrying mine like a shield, keeping everything else out." Gianna thought of her own losses, the parents she never knew, the family she'd dreamed of having before the accident that left her infertile. Yet here she was, carrying a miracle she couldn't explain. "Sometimes," she offered carefully, "love finds new ways to flow if we let it." Gabriel turned to look at her then, really look at her, as if seeing past his own pain for the first time. The garden was full of shadows now, but the peace between them felt like a gentle light. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, their footsteps synchronized on the gravel path. The evening air had grown cool, and Gabriel noticed Gianna shiver slightly in her light sweater. Inside, Mrs. Chen had left a pot of chamomile tea warming on the kitchen counter. They shared a final cup before heading to their respective rooms, both feeling something had shifted, like the first thaw after a long winter. That night, Gabriel stood at his window, looking out at Catherine's roses silvered by moonlight. For the first time in years, the garden didn't feel like a monument to loss. Instead, he saw it as Catherine had, a story unfolding, with new chapters yet to be written. In her room, Gianna knelt for her evening prayers, adding special thanks for the gift of being trusted with Gabriel's story. She prayed for his healing, for the child growing beneath her heart, and for the mystery of how God weaves hope from sorrow's threads. The estate settled into nighttime silence, broken only by the soft song of crickets and the whisper of roses nodding in the evening breeze. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, peace reigned in the hearts of two souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. The late September sun streamed through the windows of Gabriel's estate as Gianna sorted through mountains of donated clothes. Her fingers moved methodically, checking sizes and conditions, organizing items into neat piles for different age groups. The work gave her peace, especially as her own miracle grew steadily within her. "These will be perfect for the Peterson twins," she murmured, folding two matching pink sweaters. At 6 months pregnant now, her belly was becoming more noticeable, but she worked with the same gentle dedication she brought to everything. Gabriel watched from the doorway, struck by how naturally she handled the charitable work. In the past month, she'd transformed his foundation's donation center from a cold warehouse into something that felt like a warm community space. Little touches, handwritten thank you notes, carefully sorted items, personal attention to each family's needs, made all the difference. "The social workers said donations have tripled since you started helping," he said, stepping into the room. "People feel more connected to the cause now." Gianna smiled, ducking her head modestly. "It's not me. People just need to know their gifts matter, like these boots." She held up a pair of sturdy winter shoes. "These aren't just boots to a child who's never had new ones. They're hope." The morning light caught the silver cross at her throat, a gift from Miss Ruth before they'd left the city. Its simple gleam reminded Gabriel of how much had changed since that rainy night when she'd mistakenly climbed into his car. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sharp click of heels on marble. Eleanor Harlow swept into the room like a winter wind, her elegant grey suit and perfectly coiffed silver hair radiating disapproval. "Gabriel, darling," she said, air kissing his cheek while her eyes fixed on Gianna. "I thought we should discuss the situation before it gets even more out of hand." Gianna instinctively stepped back, her hands protectively cradling her belly. She'd seen Eleanor's picture in society magazines, but hadn't expected such immediate hostility. "Mother," Gabriel said, his tone careful, "I wasn't expecting you today." "Clearly." Eleanor's gaze swept the room, taking in the piles of donations with thinly veiled disdain. "The tabloids are having a field day, you know. Billionaire's mystery woman expecting miracle baby. It's becoming quite the scandal." Gianna's cheeks flushed, but she kept sorting clothes, trying to make herself invisible. She'd seen the headlines, of course. Some called her a gold digger, others spun wild theories about the baby's conception. She'd learned to avoid news stands. "The timing couldn't be worse," Eleanor continued, pacing the room. "The Harlow Foundation's annual gala is in 2 months. The board members are asking questions. Your father worked his entire life to build this family's reputation, Gabriel. Mother, Gabriel warned, but Eleanor was already turning toward Gianna. I don't know what your game is, she said coldly, but you're ruining his name. Whatever you're hoping to gain from this arrangement, name your price. We can handle this quietly. The room went still. Even the dust motes dancing in the sunlight seemed to freeze. Gianna's hands trembled as she set down the sweater she'd been folding. Mrs. Harlow, she said softly, meeting the older woman's stern gaze. I didn't choose this path, Mom. God did. Her voice grew stronger, though it remained gentle. I understand your concern for your son, but I'm not here for money or status. I'm here because your son showed kindness when I needed it most. Eleanor's expression hardened. Don't pretend to be naive. You're living in his house, working with his charity, carrying a child that the whole world thinks is his. It's quite the convenient situation, isn't it? Mother, that's enough. Gabriel's voice cracked like thunder through the room. He moved to stand between them, and for the first time in years, Eleanor saw real emotion in her son's eyes. Gianna has shown nothing but grace since the day I met her. She's helped more families through the foundation in 6 weeks than we reached all last year. But darling, your reputation, my reputation. Gabriel laughed, but there was no humor in it. My reputation was as a cold, broken man who threw money at charities to avoid dealing with his grief. Is that what you're so desperate to protect? Eleanor stepped back, startled by his vehemence. In the sudden silence, they could hear birds singing in the garden outside. I've watched Gianna pray for the families we help, Gabriel continued, his voice softening. I've seen her work until she's exhausted, never asking for anything in return. She's shown me that compassion isn't weakness. It's the strongest force there is. Tears glimmered in Gianna's eyes as she listened. She'd never heard Gabriel speak so passionately. If you're worried about the Harlow name, Mother, then look at what she's doing with it. She's turning our charity from a tax write-off into real help for real people. That's the kind of legacy Dad would have wanted. Eleanor's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen since before Catherine's death. Life in his eyes. She faltered, then gathered herself. I should go. We'll discuss this later. She turned sharply and walked out, her heels echoing down the hallway. When she was gone, Gianna let out a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant to cause trouble between you and your mother. Gabriel turned to her, his expression gentle. You haven't. Maybe for the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. He picked up a small stuffed bear from the donation pile. My father used to say that true worth isn't in what you have, but in what you give. I forgot that for a while. Gianna touched his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding. Then she returned to her sorting, humming softly as she worked. Gabriel joined her, and together they prepared gifts for families they'd never meet, but whose lives they hoped to touch. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through Catherine's roses, carrying their sweet scent through the open windows. In the distance, Eleanor's car disappeared down the long driveway, leaving behind a silence that felt less like tension and more like the quiet after a storm, when everything is washed clean and ready for new growth. The rest of the afternoon passed in peaceful productivity, with Gabriel and Gianna working side by side, their actions speaking louder than any words about the power of choosing compassion over reputation and faith over fear. The invitation sat on the kitchen counter like a gilded challenge. Gabriel watched as Gianna ran her fingers over the embossed lettering, announcing the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala. I can't possibly, she began, but Gabriel shook his head. You've been the heart of this foundation for weeks now, he said softly. The families we help should meet the person who's transformed our work. Gianna touched her growing belly, barely visible beneath her simple dress. The media will be there. The whispers. The cameras. Her voice trembled slightly. Gabriel stepped closer, his expression determined. If we hide, the world wins. He took a deep breath. I've been hiding for 5 years, Gianna. Behind my wealth, behind my grief. Maybe it's time we both step into the light. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the marble countertops. Gianna's eyes met his, searching. Are you sure? More sure than I've been about anything in a long time. 2 days later, a designer arrived at the estate with racks of evening gowns. Gianna protested the expense, but Gabriel insisted. Consider it a business expense, he said with a small smile. You're representing the foundation now. She chose a simple but elegant midnight blue gown that made her eyes shine like stars. When she emerged from her room the evening of the gala, Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. The dress flowed around her like water, and her dark hair was swept up in a graceful style that reminded him of classic paintings in museums. You look, he started, then stopped, searching for words. Gianna blushed, smoothing the fabric nervously. Is it too much? You look perfect, he said quietly. The drive to the venue was tense with anticipation. Camera flashes exploded as their car pulled up to the red carpet. Gianna's hand found Gabriel's, squeezing it tightly. Remember, he whispered, you belong here as much as anyone. They stepped out into the chaos of shouted questions and clicking cameras. Gabriel kept his hand at the small of her, back, protective and steady. The whispers followed them like shadows as they entered the grand ballroom. Can you believe he brought her? That maid who claims, such a scandal. Gianna held her head high, though Gabriel could feel her trembling slightly beside him. The crystal chandeliers cast rainbow lights across the polished floor, and the orchestra played softly in the background. Everything sparkled with wealth and privilege, a world that had once been Gabriel's comfort, but now felt somehow hollow. He led her to the stage where he was scheduled to give his opening remarks. The crowd fell silent as he approached the microphone, their faces a sea of judgment and curiosity. Good evening, he began, his voice strong and clear. Tonight, we're here to celebrate hope. Hope for children who need our help, hope for families struggling to stay together. He paused, looking out at the audience. And sometimes, hope comes to us in unexpected ways. He turned to Gianna, extending his hand. She joined him on stage, her face serene despite her racing heart. I'd like to introduce you to Gianna Jennings, he continued. The bravest woman I've ever met. The silence in the room grew deeper. Some of you may know her from gossip columns or cruel rumors, but I know her as someone who taught me that true strength lies in kindness and that miracles still happen. Sometimes they even walk into your car when you least expect them. A ripple of surprised laughter broke the tension. Gianna's eyes filled with tears as Gabriel continued. Thanks to her influence, our foundation has doubled its outreach. We're not just writing checks anymore, we're touching lives, one family at a time. The applause that followed was tentative at first, then grew stronger. As they left the stage, the orchestra began playing a familiar melody, Moon River, Catherine's favorite song. Gabriel turned to Gianna. Would you dance with me? She nodded, unable to speak. He led her to the center of the dance floor, and as they began to move, the world seemed to fade away. The gentle sway of the music wrapped around them like a protective embrace. Catherine loved this song, he said softly, just for her ears. She said it reminded her that love is like a river. It keeps flowing, no matter what stands in its way. Gianna's eyes met his, full of understanding. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. Gabriel's voice caught slightly. For so long I thought losing her meant losing everything. But lately... He glanced down at Gianna, at the quiet strength in her face. Lately I'm beginning to believe that love doesn't die. It transforms. The music swelled around them, and other couples joined the dance floor, but they remained in their own quiet bubble of understanding. Later that night, back at the estate, they sat by the crackling fireplace. The formal clothes were gone, replaced by comfortable sweaters and the ease of friendship. The flames cast warm shadows on the walls, and outside, the first stars were appearing in the velvet sky. "Thank you," Gianna said softly, "for defending me tonight, for making me feel like I belonged." Gabriel looked at her thoughtfully. "You've helped me see things differently these past weeks, about worth, about purpose." He paused, watching the fire dance. "About love." Gianna smiled, her face glowing in the firelight. "That's what faith is," she whispered, "love remembering itself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames and feeling the quiet certainty that something was healing in both their hearts, something that had been broken for far too long. The fire crackled softly, throwing sparks up the chimney like tiny stars seeking their way home. In that peaceful moment, both Gabriel and Gianna felt the gentle truth of transformation, how love, like faith, never truly dies, but simply waits to be rediscovered in new and unexpected ways. The morning sun filtered through Gabriel's study window, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. He sat there, staring at the pristine white envelope that had arrived with the morning mail. The return address belonged to Midwest Medical Laboratories, a facility he hadn't contacted. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, he found official letterhead and pages of medical jargon, but his eyes fixed on one section highlighted in yellow. DNA paternity test results. The words seemed to blur before him as he read further. Probability of paternity, 0%. Gabriel's throat went dry. He hadn't requested this test. Who had? The date stamp showed it had been processed last week. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "You need to protect yourself, Gabriel. These situations rarely end well." He paced the study, the paper crumpling in his grip. Outside, he could hear Gianna humming in the garden. She'd taken to tending Catherine's roses every morning, bringing them back to life with gentle care. The sound that once brought him comfort now felt like sandpaper on his nerves. "Jenkins," he called to his butler, "please ask Miss Jennings to come to my study." Minutes later, Gianna appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from gardening, soil still dusting her fingers. She wore a simple cotton dress that showed the slight curve of her growing belly. The sight made his chest tighten. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noticing his rigid posture. Gabriel held up the letter. "I received some interesting mail today. Care to explain this?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Gianna stepped closer, confusion clear on her face. "I don't understand. What is it?" "A DNA test." He watched her face carefully. "Showing I'm not the father of your child." The color drained from her face. "What? I never said you were." Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper. "I don't understand why there would be a test. I never claimed—" "Then why didn't you deny it more strongly when that child at the Caldwells made that announcement?" His voice rose slightly. "Why didn't you set the record straight with the media?" Tears welled in Gianna's eyes. "I did deny it. I've denied it to everyone who asked. I lost my job because I wouldn't play along with the gossip." She took a shaky breath. Gabriel, this pregnancy is as much a miracle to me as it is mysterious. The doctors said I couldn't conceive. I have no explanation except God's will. But Eleanor's voice rang in his head. That girl is playing you for a fool, Gabriel, just like all the others who came sniffing around after Catherine's death. He turned away, staring out the window. Who ordered the test, Gianna? I don't know. I swear to you I had nothing to do with this. Her voice cracked with desperation. Then why does the paperwork have my medical history? Information that only someone close would know. He spun back to face her. Were you hoping I wouldn't find out? That I'd just keep providing for you out of guilt or pity? Gianna's face crumpled. How can you think that of me? After everything we've shared? She pressed a hand to her stomach. I never asked for any of this. I never asked for the rumors or the scandal or... She stopped, wiping tears away. I never asked for your help, but you offered it. I thought you understood me. Gabriel's jaw clenched. I thought I did too. The silence between them stretched like a chasm. Outside, the roses Gianna had been tending swayed in the breeze, their petals catching the morning light, just as Catherine had loved them. I'll pack my things, Gianna said quietly. I won't burden you any longer. He didn't stop her as she left the study. His anger felt like a living thing in his chest, but underneath it lurked something worse, grief. Grief for the trust he'd started to feel, the peace he'd begun to know in her presence. That night he lay awake, listening to the soft sounds of movement from the guest wing. Gianna was packing, he knew, but pride kept him from going to her. The memory of her face in the garden, of her prayers before meals, of her gentle way with Catherine's roses, all of it felt tainted now. Before dawn, he heard the front door open and close. From his window, he watched her small figure walking down the drive, a single suitcase in hand. She paused at the gate, looking back at the house for a long moment, then disappeared into the misty morning. Hours later, in St. Michael's Church, Gianna sat alone in a back pew. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the worn wooden bench with colors. Her hands rested on her growing belly, and tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Lord, she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the sacred silence. Even when the world calls me a liar, you know the truth. She closed her eyes, letting the peace of the sanctuary wash over her. You know, my heart. You know this child is your miracle, not my scheme. The church remained quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Gianna sat there, surrounded by saints in glass and the weight of centuries of prayers, feeling more alone than she had in the foster homes of her youth. But even in her solitude, even with her heart breaking, she felt a deep certainty that God hadn't abandoned her. The same faith that had sustained her through years of loneliness wrapped around her, now like a familiar blanket. She touched her belly gently. We'll be okay, little one, she murmured. God has never failed us yet, and he won't start now. The morning light grew stronger, filling the church with golden warmth. Gianna remained in her pew, her prayers silent now, but her faith as steady as the foundations of the ancient church itself. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same grace that had carried her through every other storm in her life. In her pocket, she felt the familiar shape of her small umbrella, the one that had started everything. She hadn't left it behind this time. Some things, she knew, were meant to be carried forward, even when the path ahead seemed dark and uncertain. Thunder rumbled over Chicago as Gabriel sat in his office, staring at the report his assistant had just placed on his desk. His hands shook as he read through the details again. Are you absolutely certain about this, David? He asked, his voice hoarse. His assistant nodded grimly. The lab technician confessed everything. Maxwell Industries paid him to falsify the results. They wanted to discredit you before the charity merger next month. David hesitated. They knew hitting you personally would be more effective than attacking the business. Gabriel's chest tightened. He thought of Gianna's face that morning, the hurt in her eyes when he'd doubted her. "I'm such a fool," he whispered. "There's more," David said quietly. Maxwell's team had been watching the mansion. They knew about Miss Jennings staying there. They used your medical records from the hospital where... He paused. Where Mrs. Harlow was taken after the accident. The mention of Catherine made Gabriel's heart clench. What would she think of him now? He'd let his fear of being hurt again blind him to Gianna's genuine goodness. "Find her," he ordered, standing abruptly. "Check every shelter, every mission, every church kitchen in the city. She has to be somewhere." "Sir, it's nearly midnight and there's a storm. I don't care. Start calling. I'll drive." For hours, Gabriel searched through the rainy streets. He visited every place Gianna had mentioned during their charity work together. The homeless shelter on West Madison, the women's refuge near Lincoln Park, the soup kitchen at St. Anthony's. Each stop left him more desperate. Some remembered her, that sweet girl with the gentle smile. But no one knew where she'd gone. The rain grew heavier as midnight passed into early morning. Lightning flashed across the sky as Gabriel pulled up to St. Michael's Church. His clothes were soaked from running between buildings, but he barely noticed. Inside the church office, a tired-looking nun was reviewing donation records. "Please," Gabriel said, his voice raw. "I'm looking for Gianna Jennings. She might have come here to volunteer." The nun looked up, studying his face. "Why are you searching for her?" "Because I made a terrible mistake. Because she deserved better than my doubt." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "Because she showed me what real faith looks like, and I threw it away." Something in his words must have touched the nun's heart. She opened a ledger and turned it toward him. There, in neat handwriting, was Gianna's signature on the volunteer roster. "She's been helping in our kitchen," the nun said softly. "Even though anyone can see she's exhausted. Won't let us send her to rest." Gabriel's heart leaped. "Is she here now?" "In the basement kitchen. But sir..." He was already running, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The basement corridor was warm and smelled of soup. At the end, light spilled from an open doorway, along with the sound of dishes being washed. Gianna stood at the industrial sink, her back to the door. Even from behind, he could see how she favored one side, trying to ease the pressure on her back. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but her movements were steady as she worked. "Gianna," he breathed. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as she took in his drenched appearance. "Gabriel?" "I'm so sorry," he said, stepping forward. "The test was fake. Maxwell Industries paid to have it falsified. They wanted to destroy the Foundation's reputation." The words tumbled out. "I should have trusted you. Should have known you could never..." "Shh." Gianna's face softened with that familiar grace that had first drawn him to her. "Forgiveness isn't earned, Gabriel. It's given." The simple truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. Here she was, after everything, still offering grace he didn't deserve. But something was wrong. Her face had gone pale, and her hand clutched the edge of the sink. "Gianna?" She tried to smile, but pain creased her features. "I'm fine. I just need to..." Her knees buckled. Gabriel lunged forward, catching her before she hit the floor. Her skin was clammy, and she curled inward with a gasp of pain. "How long have you been having contractions?" he demanded, recognizing the signs from his time with Catherine. Since morning." she admitted through clenched teeth. But it's too early. The baby's not due for weeks. Why didn't you tell someone? Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Gianna gripped his arm, her breath coming in short gasps. Didn't want to be a burden. Listen to me, Gabriel said firmly, gathering her into his arms. You have never been a burden. Not to me. Not to anyone. He turned toward the door, shouting, "Help! We need help down here!" Footsteps thundered on the stairs as the nun from the office appeared. One look at Gianna's face sent her running for the phone. "An ambulance is coming," Gabriel assured Gianna, settling her as comfortably as possible against his chest. "Just hold on." Rain drummed against the small basement windows as they waited. Gabriel murmured quiet encouragement, his heart racing with fear he tried not to show. Gianna's contractions were coming faster now, each one drawing a small whimper she tried to suppress. "I'm scared," she whispered between pains. Gabriel held her closer. "I know, but you're not alone anymore. I'm right here and I'm not leaving." He pressed his lips to her damp forehead. "You and this baby, you're my miracle now, the one I was too blind to see." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Gianna's fingers intertwined with his, holding on as another contraction wrapped around her. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that basement kitchen, something else was building. A different kind of miracle, born of forgiveness freely given and faith finally understood. Thunder cracked overhead as Gabriel burst through the church doors, Gianna cradled protectively against his chest. The rain pelted them mercilessly as he hurried toward his car, trying to shield her from the worst of the downpour. Each step was careful but urgent on the slick pavement. "Stay with me," he murmured, feeling her body tense with another contraction. Her fingers clutched his shirt, her face pressed against his shoulder to muffle a cry of pain. His driver James had already thrown open the back door, and Gabriel slid inside with Gianna still in his arms. "Northwestern Memorial," he ordered, his voice tight with worry. "Fast as you safely can." The car pulled away from the curb, wipers fighting against the torrential rain. Streetlights blurred past as they wove through traffic, each flash illuminating Gianna's pale face. She was trying so hard to be brave, but Gabriel could feel her trembling. "The contractions?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "How far apart are they now?" Gianna's answer was cut short by another wave of pain. She curled inward, a small whimper escaping despite her attempts to stay quiet. Gabriel counted the seconds until her body relaxed slightly. 3 minutes, he said grimly. "Maybe less." He pressed the intercom. "James, lights and sirens would be good right about now." The emergency lights began flashing as they sped through the stormy streets. Gabriel had never felt so helpless. All his wealth, all his influence, meant nothing in this moment. He could only hold her, whispering words of encouragement as thunder rolled overhead. "Remember to breathe," he coached softly, demonstrating the pattern they'd learned about during their late-night talks. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Gianna tried to follow his lead, but another contraction hit harder than before. This time she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "It shouldn't hurt like this." Fear clawed at Gabriel's chest. He'd lost Catherine and their unborn daughter to complications. The memory of that helplessness threatened to overwhelm him, but Gianna needed his strength now. He couldn't fall apart. "We're almost there," he promised, though the journey seemed endless. "Just hold on." The car finally screeched to a stop at the emergency entrance. Before James could reach them, Gabriel had already thrown open the door and was carrying Gianna through the rain once more. Her face was ghost white now, her breathing shallow and rapid. Help! He shouted as they entered the bright, fluorescent lighting of the ER. She's in premature labor. Medical staff converged on them immediately. A nurse brought a wheelchair, but Gianna's grip on Gabriel's shirt tightened in panic. Don't leave, she pleaded. I'm right here, he assured her as he carefully settled her into the chair. I'm not going anywhere. But hospital protocol had other ideas. As they rushed Gianna toward the delivery ward, a nurse firmly but kindly stopped Gabriel at the double doors. Sir, you'll need to wait here while we examine her. Someone will update you soon. But she needs... He started to protest. What she needs right now is immediate medical attention. The nurse said gently. The waiting room is just through there. We'll come get you as soon as possible. Gabriel stood frozen, watching the doors swing shut behind them. The last glimpse he had of Gianna was her face turned back toward him, scared but trying to smile. Then she was gone, and he was alone with his fears. The waiting room was mercifully empty. Gabriel paced, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor, leaving wet tracks from his rain-soaked clothes. Every time the doors opened, he spun around, hoping for news. But minutes stretched into an hour, then 2, with only brief updates that told him nothing he needed to know. Finally, he sank into one of the hard plastic chairs and did something he hadn't done since Catherine died. He prayed. Lord, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, don't take her too. Please. I know I haven't talked to you in years. I know I turned my back when you took Catherine and our baby. But Gianna, she never lost faith in you, even when I did. She showed me what real faith looks like. His hands clasped together so tight his knuckles went white. So if you're listening, if you're still there, please, don't let history repeat itself. Don't take them from me. The storm raged on outside, but inside Gabriel felt a strange calm settle over him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple act of finally letting go of his anger at God. Or maybe it was something more, something Gianna would call grace. Hours passed in a blur of coffee cups and muttered prayers. Near dawn, a doctor finally approached him. Gabriel stood on shaky legs, trying to read the man's expression. Mr. Harlow, she's delivered. A little girl. But I need to be honest with you. The baby is very premature, and her lungs aren't fully developed. The next 24 hours will be critical. Gabriel's throat closed up. And Gianna. Exhausted but stable, she's asking for you. They led him to a private room where Gianna lay propped up on pillows, looking impossibly fragile against the white hospital sheets. But her eyes were clear and calm as they met his. Gabriel, she said softly, reaching out her hand. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her small hand in both of his. Words failed him as tears he'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. Hey, she whispered, squeezing his fingers. No tears. She needs our strength now. Gabriel wiped his eyes with his free hand. Have you seen her? Just for a moment before they took her to the NICU. Gianna's voice wavered slightly. She's so tiny, Gabriel, but she's fighting. She took a shaky breath. If she lives, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Gianna's eyes held his, full of a mother's fierce love and desperate hope. Let her know she was wanted, that she was loved from the very first moment, no matter what anyone says about where she came from. Gabriel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat, but he nodded, pouring all his understanding and commitment into that simple gesture. They sat together in the quiet room as morning light began to filter through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Now all they could do was wait and hope and pray that their tiny miracle would find the strength to stay. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through the hospital windows, casting a gentle glow across the sterile corridors. Gabriel had dozed off in an uncomfortable chair beside Gianna's bed, his hand still loosely holding hers. The quiet beeping of monitors had become a steady rhythm through the night, marking each precious moment of their vigil. A soft knock at the door startled him awake. A nurse with kind eyes stepped in, her face bright with something more than just professional courtesy. "Mr. Harlow, Ms. Jennings," she said softly, "I have wonderful news. Your little one had a very good night. Her breathing has stabilized, and she's showing remarkable strength for such a premature baby." Gianna's grip tightened on Gabriel's hand, her eyes filling with tears. Can we see her?" "Of course. We've moved her to a special care unit, and you can both visit now. Would you like a wheelchair, Ms. Jennings?" Gabriel helped Gianna into the wheelchair, his hands gentle but trembling slightly with emotion. As they followed the nurse down the corridor, he noticed how Gianna's lips moved in silent prayer, her fingers clutched together in her lap. The special care nursery was quiet, except for the soft humming of equipment. Their baby lay in an incubator, looking impossibly tiny, but perfect. Tubes and wires connected her to various monitors, but what caught their attention immediately was her hand, small fingers moving, reaching out as if sensing their presence. "She's been quite active this morning," the nurse said, helping Gianna position her hand through the incubator's opening. "You can touch her now." When Gianna's finger met her daughter's tiny hand, the baby's fingers curled around it instantly. The simple reflex brought fresh tears to Gianna's eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama." Gabriel stood behind them, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. Watching Gianna with their daughter, because that's how he thought of her now, biology be damned, he saw all the love and faith that had brought them to this moment. "She needs a name," he said softly. Gianna looked up at him, her face glowing with maternal joy. "Did you have something in mind?" Gabriel knelt beside the wheelchair, his eyes moving between Gianna and the baby. "I'd like to call her Hope," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's what Catherine always said kept her going through hard times, and it's what you brought back into my life, Gianna. Hope when I thought I'd lost it forever." Gianna's free hand found his cheek, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "Hope," she repeated softly. "It's perfect." They stayed there, memorizing every detail of their daughter's face, until a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Eleanor Harlow's distinctive voice could be heard speaking to hospital staff, and Gabriel felt Gianna tense beside him. "It's okay," he assured her, squeezing her shoulder. "Let me talk to her first." But when Eleanor appeared in the doorway, she wasn't wearing her usual mask of social propriety. Her face was open, vulnerable even, as she took in the scene before her, her son, the woman she'd judged so harshly, and the tiny miracle that had brought them together. "Mother," Gabriel started, but Eleanor held up a hand. "Please," she said softly. "Let me see my granddaughter." The word granddaughter hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Gianna's eyes widened, and Gabriel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Eleanor approached the incubator slowly, her usual confident stride replaced by something almost reverent. She peered through the clear walls at Hope, who chose that moment to stretch her tiny arms, fingers splaying like starfish. "Oh," Eleanor breathed, one manicured hand pressing against her heart. "She's beautiful." Gianna reached out and touched Eleanor's arm. "Would you like to hold my hand while you touch hers? Sometimes it helps with the nerves." The simple offer of kindness from a woman she'd treated so coldly seemed to break something in Eleanor. She nodded, letting Gianna guide her hand through the incubator's opening. When Hope's fingers curled around her grandmother's finger, Eleanor let out a soft sob. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, though it wasn't clear if she was speaking to Hope, Gianna, or her son. "I've been so afraid of losing what little I had left of Catherine. I couldn't see the gift God was giving us all." Gabriel moved to stand beside his mother, watching as she gently stroked Hope's tiny hand. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes swimming with tears. "Your wife," she said softly. "Do you remember how she used to pray every night? Not just for herself, but for you? For your future?" Gabriel nodded, throat too tight to speak. "She used to pray that if anything ever happened to her, God would send you someone with a heart like hers, someone who could love deeply enough to heal your grief." Eleanor looked at Gianna, who was watching them with quiet grace. "She's the kind of woman your wife prayed you'd find again." The words hit Gabriel like a physical force. A dam broke inside him, and suddenly he was weeping. Not the quiet tears of grief he'd allowed himself over the years, but deep, cleansing sobs that shook his whole body. Eleanor pulled him close, and then Gianna's hand was there too, and they held each other as years of pain and fear and loneliness washed away. Hope slept peacefully through it all, her tiny chest rising and falling with each steady breath. Outside the window, the morning sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, as if God himself was celebrating the healing of these broken hearts. When Gabriel could finally speak again, he looked at his mother and Gianna, the two women who represented his past and future, and saw love reflected in both their faces. Eleanor had one hand still touching Hope's fingers, the other clasped tightly in Gianna's grip. The sight made his heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing they would understand all he couldn't put into words. Gianna smiled up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "God's timing is perfect," she said softly, "even when we don't understand it." Eleanor nodded, squeezing Gianna's hand. "And his grace is sufficient," she added, her voice warm with newfound humility, "even for proud old women who take too long to see it." Together they watched Hope sleep, their hearts beating in time with her tiny breaths, each one a reminder that miracles still happened, not just the miracle of new life, but the miracle of love reborn, of faith restored, and of hope renewed. The gentle spring breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms through the open hospital window. 3 weeks had passed since Hope's dramatic arrival, and the tiny room had transformed into a space filled with warmth and healing. Cards and flowers from well-wishers covered every surface, their cheerful colors brightening the sterile walls. Gianna sat in the rocking chair beside Hope's incubator, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall with each steady breath. The doctors called it remarkable how quickly the premature baby had gained strength. "A fighter," they said, but Gianna knew it was more than that. It was grace. "Look who's awake," Gabriel said softly, entering the room with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Gianna and settled into the chair beside her. They had fallen into this comfortable routine, sharing quiet mornings, watching their miracle grow stronger day by day. "She opened her eyes earlier," Gianna told him, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The nurse says they might be turning brown." Gabriel leaned closer to the incubator, his expression tender. "Like yours," he murmured. The moment was interrupted by a gentle knock. Eleanor entered, carrying a thick folder of papers. "The press is getting restless," she said, her tone apologetic. "They're demanding answers about the DNA test scandal." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but Gianna reached for his hand. "Maybe it's time," she said softly. "Time to share our story, the real story." He looked at her, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure? You don't owe them anything." "No," Gianna agreed. "But maybe we owe it to others who might need hope. Your wife taught you that wealth comes with responsibility. This is our chance to use this situation for good." Eleanor watched their exchange with quiet pride. The past weeks had changed her too, softening her edges and opening her heart to the kind of love that transcended social status and scandal. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said, pulling out his own folder, "about the future, about what really matters." He spread several documents on the table. "I'm stepping down from my corporations." Both women stared at him in surprise. "All of them?" Eleanor asked. Gabriel nodded. "I'm converting most of my assets into a foundation for single mothers, children in need, families struggling to find hope." He looked at Gianna. "The kind of people you've always seen when others looked away." Tears welled in Gianna's eyes. "Gabriel, that's your life's work." "No," he said firmly. "My life's work starts now, with hope, with you, with doing something that actually matters." The next week passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Hope grew strong enough to leave the hospital, and Gabriel's team arranged a press conference at his estate. The media speculation had reached fever pitch, with tabloids spinning wild theories about the DNA test and Gianna's background. On the morning of the conference, Gianna stood in front of the mirror, smoothing her simple blue dress. Eleanor had offered to lend her designer clothes, but Gianna had declined. "I want to be myself," she'd said, the maid who found grace in unexpected places. Gabriel found her there, adjusting her collar nervously. "You look beautiful," he said, coming to stand behind her. "Are you ready?" She met his eyes in the mirror. "With you?" "Yes." The press conference was held in the estate's garden, where Catherine's roses still bloomed. Cameras flashed as Gabriel and Gianna took their seats at the table, Hope sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside them. Gabriel cleared his throat and began. "5 years ago, I lost my wife and unborn child. I thought I'd lost my faith too. I built walls of wealth around my grief and called it strength." He paused, looking at Gianna. "Then God sent a stranger into my car on a rainy night, and everything changed." He explained about the manufactured DNA scandal, his voice steady but firm. "Yes, there was a test. No, I never requested it. It was fabricated by those who wanted to destroy what we were building. Not just my reputation, but the foundation of trust and hope we'd created." Gianna leaned forward to speak, her voice clear despite her nerves. "We could pursue legal action. We could name names and demand justice." She smiled, reaching for Gabriel's hand. "But we don't want justice through bitterness. We want it through kindness that changes lives." The reporters scribbled frantically as Gabriel announced his resignation from his corporate positions. "My wealth was a shield," he admitted. "Now it will be a bridge, helping others find the hope we've found." A reporter raised her hand. "Miss Jennings, what will your role be in all this?" Before Gianna could answer, Gabriel turned to her. The cameras forgotten, he took both her hands in his. "That depends on her answer to this question." His voice softened. "Gianna, these past months have taught me that miracles don't just happen, they're chosen. Every day in small acts of kindness and forgiveness, in the courage to trust again." He squeezed her hands. "Stay. Not as my guest, but as my partner. In this foundation, in raising hope, in rebuilding faith, in all of it." The garden fell silent except for the gentle rustling of roses in the breeze. Gianna looked at Hope, then at Eleanor's encouraging smile, and finally at Gabriel's hopeful eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder for all to hear. "Yes." The applause that broke out wasn't just from the press corps. Staff members, security guards, and even some of the reporters wiped tears from their eyes. This wasn't just a story about scandal or wealth or social climbing. It was about grace, the kind that turns strangers into family, transforms loss into purpose, and proves that love, when chosen daily, can heal even the deepest wounds. Hope stirred in her bassinet, opening her eyes to the sound of celebration. Gabriel and Gianna turned to her together, their joined hands resting near her tiny fingers. In that moment, surrounded by roses and camera flashes, they were more than just a headline. They were proof that sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as mistakes, and the richest legacies are built not from what we gain, but from what we give away. The countryside estate bloomed with new life as summer settled in. The gardens that had once stood silent now rang with Hope's delighted squeals and the gentle murmur of conversation between Gabriel and Gianna. Each morning they would walk the grounds together, Hope nestled in her stroller, her tiny hands reaching for butterflies that danced above her. "You hold the trowel like this," Gianna demonstrated, her hands covered in rich soil as she showed Gabriel how to plant new bulbs. He watched intently. This man who could navigate billion-dollar deals but had never learned the simple joy of nurturing growth from the earth. "My mother always said I had 2 black thumbs." He chuckled, carefully copying her movements. "Well, your mother wasn't a gardener like me," Gianna teased, glancing over at Hope, who was contentedly watching them from her shaded stroller. Sometimes the best things grow from the most unlikely soil. Eleanor's sleek car would appear in the driveway several times a week now, her arms always full of carefully chosen presents. Handmade blankets, classic children's books, tiny shoes that made Gianna's eyes mist with gratitude. The transformation in Gabriel's mother was remarkable. Where once there had been judgment, now there was joy. Where there had been fear, now flourished love. "I've been thinking about Hope's baptism," Eleanor said one afternoon, as they sat in the sunroom, watching Hope practice rolling over on her playmat. The chapel at St. Michael's would be perfect. Intimate but beautiful. Gianna squeezed Eleanor's hand. "We'd love that. You know, when I first came here, I never imagined that I'd become such a doting grandmother." Eleanor finished with a soft laugh. "God does have a way of surprising us, doesn't he?" As summer deepened, Gabriel and Gianna decided to host a small dinner for the charity's staff, the dedicated people who helped them extend hope to others. The evening air was sweet with the scent of roses as tables were set up on the lawn. Twinkling lights strung between trees cast a gentle glow over the gathering. The staff shared stories of lives changed, of mothers finding new beginnings, of children discovering opportunities they'd never dreamed possible. Hope was passed from arm to arm, cherished as the living symbol of what their work meant, that miracles could bloom in the most unexpected moments. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Gabriel took Gianna's hand. "Come with me," he whispered, leading her toward Catherine's rose arbor. The structure stood laden with climbing roses, their pale petals luminous in the gathering dusk. Fireflies had begun to rise from the gardens, their gentle lights dancing around them like earthbound stars. Gabriel stopped beneath the arch of roses, turning to face Gianna. His eyes held a depth of emotion that made her breath catch. "You know," he said softly, "I spent years asking God why. Why he took Catherine and our baby, why he left me alone. I was so angry, so lost in grief, that I couldn't see the answer he was preparing." Gianna's heart began to race as Gabriel took both her hands in his. "You were that answer, Gianna. You and Hope. When you stepped into my car that rainy night, you stepped into my darkness carrying your own quiet light of faith. You taught me that love isn't something we lose. It's something that grows, changes, finds new ways to bloom." Tears slipped down, Gianna's cheeks as Gabriel lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "You were the answer I didn't know I was praying for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me, Gianna? Will you help me build this new life, raise our daughter, and show the world what grace really looks like?" "Yes," Gianna whispered through her tears. "Yes, with all my heart." As Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple but elegant band that spoke of new beginnings rather than past wealth, the fireflies seemed to swirl around them in celebration. He stood and drew her into his arms, their embrace witnessed by the roses Catherine had planted and the stars that sparkled overhead. In that moment, held in the circle of Gabriel's arms with hope sleeping peacefully inside and Eleanor's blessings surrounding them like a warm embrace, Gianna felt the full circle of God's plan. From a rain-soaked night of confusion to this garden full of promise, every step had been guided by a love greater than their own. Sunlight dappled through the oak trees, casting dancing shadows across the Harlow estate's sprawling lawn. Colourful balloons bobbed in the gentle summer breeze as laughter and music filled the air. It was Hope's first birthday, and the garden had transformed into a wonderland of celebration. Children from the shelter ran between tables decorated with wildflowers, their faces sticky with cake frosting. Volunteers from the church chatted with charity workers, sharing stories of lives transformed. The scene was exactly what Gabriel and Gianna had dreamed of, not a showcase of wealth, but a gathering of hearts bound by love and grace. In the center of it all, Gabriel sat cross-legged on a checkered blanket, helping Hope toddle between guests. His face glowed with joy as she took wobbly steps, her tiny hands gripping his fingers. Gone was the haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes. In its place shone the light of a father's love. "Would you look at that?" Miss Ruth said, settling into a garden chair beside Gianna. Her weathered face creased with a knowing smile. That man was made to be a daddy. Gianna watched as Hope collapsed into Gabriel's lap, both of them dissolving into giggles. "It's strange," she mused, "how a wrong car led me home." She touched the simple gold band on her finger, remembering that rainy night that had changed everything. Miss Ruth patted her hand. "Wrong turns are often God's straight lines, dear. He sees the map we can't." Eleanor appeared with a fresh piece of birthday cake, her elegant suit slightly rumpled from carrying Hope earlier. "I never thought I'd enjoy a party with paper plates." She laughed. "But this is perfect." As afternoon mellowed into evening, guests began to drift away with hugs and well wishes. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a dreamy glow over the garden. Hope had fallen asleep in her grandmother's arms, worn out from all the excitement. Gianna stood by, the large bay window in the library, watching the last rays of sunlight touch the roses. Catherine's roses, now tended by loving hands and blooming more brilliantly than ever. She held Hope, who had stirred and wanted her mother, the baby's warm weight a constant reminder of miracles. Gabriel's footsteps whispered across the carpet as he joined them. His arms encircled them both, and they stood together in peaceful silence, watching darkness soften the garden's edges. "Sometimes," Gianna said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "God answers prayers by breaking what we thought was perfect, so he can build something better." She felt Gabriel's arms tighten around them in response. Outside, the roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, their petals catching the last light. The sound of their family's laughter still seemed to echo in the gentle dusk, a melody of joy written by grace and guided by faith. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.